Shanghai to host US China trade talks next week. July 25, 2019. U.S. Treasury Secretary Steven Mnuchin said Wednesday that 2 days of talks between U.S. and Chinese officials will be held in Shanghai early next week to seek progress in the year-long trade dispute between the two countries. It would be the first direct meeting between the two sides since the collapse of the talks in May after U.S. President Donald Trump accused Beijing of backtracking on its commitments. Mnuchin said he would head with U.S. Trade Representative Robert Lighthizer, the visiting U.S. delegation to China, for Monday for talks on Tuesday and Wednesday. He told CNBC that he hoped to make progress, but there were a lot of issues involved, so he expected another round of talks later in Washington, but stressed that a return to the table at the direction of the two presidents important. Senior officials have held telephone conversations twice over the past 2 weeks in a bid to relaunch negotiations. During a meeting in Japan last month, the U.S. president and his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping agreed to avoid further escalation in the year-long trade dispute amid efforts by both sides to revive negotiations. The two countries exchanged customs duties on $360 billion worth of trade, but Trump also threatened to impose more duties on other Chinese goods. Mnuchin hinted that national security concerns that prompted Washington to impose severe sanctions on China's large telecom group Huawei are separate from trade talks. But he played down concerns about any link between Google and Beijing. "We are not aware of Google's activity with the Chinese government in a worrying way," he said last week. Trump said he wanted his administration to consider whether Google was working with the Chinese government, which the American internet giant quickly denied. On the other hand, the Chinese government has agreed that 5 Chinese companies will buy about 3 million tons of U.S. soybeans without import duty retaliation duties, while trade negotiations between the two countries continue. Today, al-Bussi in Kuwait to discuss the results of the reconstruction conference. Saturday, July 27, 2019. Baghdad al-Sabah, Baghdad. Reuters. Speaker of the House of Representatives Mohammed al-Bussi will begin his official visit to Kuwait on Saturday, the third since he took office, to discuss the results of the Iraq Reconstruction Conference. The visit will be accompanied by 10 governors as well as senior government officials. The Speaker of the House of Representatives Sheikh Hamid said in a press statement that al-Bussi will lead an official delegation to Kuwait, including the Secretary General of the Council of Ministers Hamid al-Ghazi and the President of the Reconstruction Fund Mustafa al-Hidi, with 10 Iraqi governors, as well as the Chairman of the Committee on Oil and Energy in Parliament Hibad al-Bussi and Chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee Cherko Mirwais. The 2-day visit will include a meeting of senior Kuwaiti officials and will be devoted to discussing the results of the Kuwait International Conference for the Reconstruction of Iraq, which was held in February last year, Hamid said, adding that the Iraqi delegation will discuss with the Kuwaiti officials ways to invest money launched by the Conference Kuwait, which amounted to more than $30 billion in the form of loans and credit facilities and investments to rebuild what was destroyed by the war on terrorism. In turn, the Iraqi ambassador to Kuwait al-Hashemi said that the visit of Speaker of the House of Representatives Mohammed al-Bussi of Kuwait will discuss how to invest the grants provided by the Kuwait Conference, adding that the date of the visit of Prime Minister Adel Abdul Mahdi of Kuwait has not yet been determined, likely to be in this year. He also discussed with the British ambassador to Iraq, John Wilkes, to activate the efforts of the international community and the donor countries, including Britain, for reconstruction and investment, to work on strategic projects within the British facilities provided to the Iraqi government and to address the administrative and bureaucratic corruption that hinders such projects, to complete the requirements for the return of the displaced to their homes, to stabilize, and to emphasize the continuation of joint cooperation to eliminate the cells of the organization calling for the terrorist. On the level of political and security developments in the region, the meeting stressed, according to a statement by the al-Bussi office, the need to reduce the escalation and not drag the region into a conflict that affects the security of international navigation and stop it, and all work to calm and defuse the crisis to avoid any steps that will lead in the future to more tension. For his part, Ambassador Wilkes expressed his admiration for the high patriotic spirit of all the Iraqi people and their willingness to go ahead with the national project with the national Iraqi vision, pointing out that this requires additional efforts of the political forces to succeed and achieve results on the ground. On the other hand, the United Nations mission, its support for the procedures to achieve provincial elections according to international standards, and said the office of al-Bussi in a statement received morning copy. The Speaker of the House met the UN envoy in Iraq, Jenin Hines Balashkert, election Amirarian. The office added that the meeting discussed the importance of the adoption of the draft law of the First Amendment to the Law of Provincial Elections not organized in the province and districts of its number 12 of 2018, voted by the House of Representatives last Monday. Parliamentary measures to lift the immunity of more than 30 deputies. Saturday, July 27, 2019. Baghdad, Shema Rashid.
Muhammad Abdul Wahab.
The Council of Representatives is preparing to lift the immunity of deputies required to judge on various charges ranging from defamation and corruption. While the political blocs in the Council confirmed its support for the claims of the Supreme Judicial Council on this file, a judicial expert that the Parliament did not lift the immunity of one of its members since the start of the first session. Only one case was overturned by the federal court. The deputy head of the legal committee, Mohammed Al-Ghazi. The Parliament continues to lift the immunity of deputies required for the judiciary as a legal and constitutional procedure and the deputy to defend himself against elimination. Al-Ghazi told Al-Sabah, for the ministers who are accused of corruption, those who have been told by the Prime Minister must be referred to the judiciary before the statement, because they do not enjoy immunity, whether they are former or current. So the legal procedures are easy to be established against them, head of the Anti-Corruption Agency, to proceed with the investigation procedures and refer the wanted parties to the concerned parties as they are considering these matters until proven guilty or not. He added that the Supreme Judicial Council earlier in the House of Representatives, with the presence of personalities, have become members of Parliament and previously held executive positions in previous governments, have been charged with some charges of corruption in the House of Representatives to lift immunity from them as well as current deputies, that the number of more than 30 deputies ranging between charges of libel and defamation and other charges corruption. Iraqi foreign exchange reserves rise to $65 billion. July 27, 2019. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, said on Saturday that Iraq's foreign reserves rose to $65 billion as a result of the surplus in public finances. The International Monetary Fund said in a press release received by Al Ghad Press, a copy of it, after the conclusion of the Executive Council Article 4 consultations for 2019 with Iraq. The total international reserves of $65 billion by the end of 2018, noting that the rise due to the recovery of oil prices reduce weaknesses in the Iraqi economy and create safety margins in public finances. The International Monetary Fund predicted that foreign reserves would fall below adequate levels as a result of the decline in public finances after a 27% increase in spending and weak revenues due to the cancellation of non-oil taxes. On the other hand, a source in the Ministry of Finance, the reserve was refreshed when Dr. Sinan al-Shababi, governor of the central bank in 2010, and reserves of $78 billion to it fell and collapsed after the departure of Shababi and because of the auction of uncontrolled currency and non-fundamental approvals for the establishment of private banks and outlets selling currency undisciplined, and legal irregularities even collapsed to $58 billion in Chizamaner. Left double quotation mark. Al-Bawsi arrives in Kuwait and will meet these personalities. Release date: July 27, 2019, 14:39. Baghdad. Al-Furat News. Speaker of the House of Representatives Mohammed Al-Bawsi arrived on Saturday to Kuwait on an official visit accompanied by a delegation of deputies and 10 governors and senior officials. During the visit, Al-Bawsi will meet with his Kuwaiti counterpart Marzouk Al-Ghanim, the Emir of Kuwait Sheikh Sabah Al-Ahmad Al-Jaber Al-Sabah, Prime Minister Jaber Mubarak Al-Hamid Al-Sabah, and a number of officials to discuss means of investment. The statement said, funds allocated for the reconstruction of Iraq at the Kuwait International Donor Conference. The statement added that this visit comes within the framework of a series of visits and meetings between officials of the two countries, stressing the strengthening of prospects for cooperation in all fields to achieve the aspirations of the two neighboring peoples and their aspirations. Agreement on free trade area between Iraq and Kuwait at the experts table. Release date: 7/2019, 1400 hours. Baghdad. Al-Furat News. Economists dealt with the agreement of free trade zone between Iraq and Kuwait. The Baghdad Economic Forum, in cooperation with the Economic Elite Group, organized an economic workshop titled Iraq's Trade Relations with Neighboring Countries, Benefits and Costs within the Framework of International Trade Relations. The head of the Baghdad Economic Forum, Faiz al-Salman, focused on the Gulf oil conflict, the agreement on the establishment of a free trade area between Iraq and Kuwait, the economic and political challenges facing Kuwait and its economic relations with its regional environment, on the distribution of commonwealth with neighboring countries. He said, the Baghdad Economic Forum proposes the formation of a voluntary advisory council of Iraqi competencies to support and strengthen the Iraqi negotiator in defense of national rights and national security of Iraq. He pointed out that we should consider the Kuwaiti strategy as one package, although Kuwait has marketed it individually to cover and facilitate the promotion of the Greater Mubarak Port Project, the joint venture agreement for the joint oil fields, the railway project, the agreement with China for the economic investment of the islands of Warba, Baba and areas of northern Kuwait, amending the Kuwaiti constitution to allow the non-Muslimization of non-Muslims. The strategic economic agreement with China will make the islands of Kuwait adjacent to Iraq and the northern Kuwait region an advanced Chinese economic colony capable of manufacturing Chinese goods. which can be a national product of Kuwait and possibly nationalities and other characteristics as needed, he said. And neighboring countries and the Eastern Mediterranean region, Europe, as well as the exploitation of Iraqi territory and railways to reach Turkey and the ports of the Eastern Mediterranean and from them to the European market. He urged the Iraqi negotiator to take into consideration Iraq's geographic location and demographic strength, sources of wealth, military strength, pointing out that it is a Muslim partnership project will not live long unless it is balanced and fair, so the parties must go towards the project of real economic integration, or to enter into a more advanced stage of the project of economic integration is that the Iraqi government proposes to the Kuwaiti government a project alternative to the package of proposed agreements, the project of the Confederacy Union. Similar to the Union of Lowlands, the Netherlands and Belgium, as well as the European Common Market. A member of the Baghdad Economic Forum, Ikram Abdul Aziz, stood at the Jordanian trade agreement and its various points. Abdul Aziz pointed out that the conclusion of this agreement on the negative side is the weakness of the local product against the importer and its effects on local industry and agriculture. And in terms of oil, where it will be sold at prices lower than the world price. On the positive side, it is to facilitate trade exchange and develop human resources operating in various sectors, as well as a new outlet for the export of crude oil. The representative of the Ministry of Commerce Musab Osama has stood at the secondary framework for the conclusion of treaties under the Vienna Convention for the conclusion of treaties in 1969, and lashed Osama on the Iraqi Law of Treaties No. 35 of 2015 and the most important terms and definitions and the role of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in this matter. Forms of agreements. Falih al-Zubaydi of the Faculty of Management and Economics, Mustansiriya University, discussed the importance of trade agreements with neighboring countries. He said, the conclusion of trade and political agreements and any form of agreements between countries must be based on their common interests and mutual benefits, and the interest of common things belonging to those countries and based on the most of several factors, most notably the geographical factor, which is of great importance between neighboring countries as well as the dimension of civilization and the convergence of religious and ethnic. Economic dimension. He pointed out that the neighboring countries of Iraq seek to conclude agreements with Iraq because of the potential of the impact and influence with him for the most important reasons that the country is mediating a region is very important and dangerous because of its geographical location and the countries of the region's strategic depth, similar to Iraq with Turkey and Iran and Syria, of the diversity of national, religious and sectarian, as well as that Iraq is of great importance in the hearts of the peoples of the region in general because of its cultural status and historical depth, as well as the economic dimension and is the most important factors that push those countries to conclude agreements with Iraq after the emergence of many wars and international sanctions and the blockade of its economy. Therefore, all countries are trying to increase exports to Iraq to achieve substantial material gains. In view of these countries, the Iraqi market is an important commercial project for them.